So some of you guys probably know a little bit about me. Obviously I have a bunch of friends here who know all about me. But some of you might not, so I'm just going to give you a little history of my whole drumming and musical education and background and where it came from, and kind of take you from back there where we are here, talk about some musical concepts along the way, and then hopefully you guys will have a bunch of questions for me. So, I grew up here in Dallas, Texas, which is a great place to grow up, and I was really lucky to have a lot of great teachers along the way and really good music programs at all the schools I went to from when I was really young. And I actually started with classical piano lessons when I was about 6. I did that for about 3 years, and then started to have an interest in drums, and told my parents I wanted to take lessons when I was about 9, and they called up Brookmays Music Store, which I think is still there, over on LBJ. Is that still there, Brookmays?
Yeah.
It is,
oh,
right?
yeah.
Oh, sure.
Okay. So, anyway, they found me a great teacher named Jack Iden. So basically, besides just banging around on like conga drums and pots and pans and all the typical stuff, I hadn't really played the drums at all until I walked into that door that day. And so Jack, the first thing he does is shows me how to hold the drumsticks, and he tells me, with this hand, it hold like a hammer is how he described it. And then he showed me the left hand, and he taught me how to play a traditional grip, which, seemed really weird. At first time, does anybody here play traditional grip?
I'm trying to, Aaron.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and again, there's no right or wrong way. It's just the way I was taught, so it stuck with me. So he showed me how to do that. It felt really weird, but obviously I stuck with it, and it's worked out really good. But he was great, and he got me started on rudiments. That was the very first thing we did. Learn all the rudiments, got me into reading, and basically pretty much forced me to stay on a snare drum for the first 2 years that I was playing drums. So I always complained to my mom and be like, I want to, can you pick me up? Can you tell Jack, I want to get a drum set? And he was like, no, I can't force you, but I really think you ought to just work on your technique and your hands and your reading before you get a kit. It turned out to be the best advice I ever had. So finally, when I was about 11, we found a drum set. We got an old CB700 set with some old pasty cymbals, and that was great. And then I was looking for a drum set teacher, and the first guy I started taking drum set lessons with was a guy named Rick Latham, who was a great drummer, and he was really helpful. He really got me into chart reading and big band interpretation and funk drumming, and he had written a book called Advanced Funk Studies that just came out at the time. He was great, and also I was really lucky that I had, all the schools I went to had really good music programs, so I was playing, symphonic orchestra and big band and doing all that all along the way. And then I was lucky enough to go to a place here in town called Arts Magnet High School.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
Does anybody here go there?
It's called Booker T. Washington now.
Okay, Booker T. Washington, yeah.
Anybody here from there?
Great. A lot of my friends here went there. Kenny Stern, Moondog, Gerald, Ludwig.
You're back.
And, it was just a great place because as whoever goes there knows, you're getting to play music half the day, and, I was in big band, I was in a small group, I was in the orchestra, learning music theory, all this great stuff. And also, on top of that, just having a whole group of friends that were musicians that we could, form bands with and jam after school and on the weekends and all that. And then, nothing's better than getting together with your friends and playing music. That's all the practicing is a huge part of it, but eventually you got to get out and play. Then when I was in high school, I started to look for a new teacher, and I got, one of the guys that was really one of my biggest influences, teaching-wise, a guy named Henry Oxtell. I know some of you guys all took with him. Henry was great. He was one of the jazz studies guys up in North Texas, so he had taught a lot of really great drummers. And he actually taught Rick Latham, who I took with before, and he, again, was a real expert at big band interpretation and reading, which really I found applies to everything I'm doing now, which is, most of what I do is play with groups and play songs, so that's all about interpretation and trying to come up with the right parts and all that. So that was really helpful. Then I graduated Arts Magnet. I went to Berklee School of Music for 1 year and studied with Tommy Campbell, who's a great drummer. And he was amazing, and that was a really good opportunity. That was like one of the times where I really lived in the practice room, because I think, at some point or the other, if you want to really, be a musician, get to a certain level, pretty much anybody will tell you they spent, like, at some point of their life, they did their time, as I like to say, in that room. And, when I was at Berkeley, I'd be in there like 8 to 10 hours a day. And, at some point you kind of got to do that. I practiced a lot in high school, too. You don't have that much time because you're in school. And luckily, in my case, I was playing a lot of music at school, so I was getting a lot of hours in. But at some point, you really got to put on the work, and that never ends. So I went to Berkeley, then I decided to move back here for a year, studied with Henry again, and played in a bunch of bands here in Dallas. And then decided and Henry always told me, one of his big advice to me in high school was like, if you really want to, there's a lot of different ways to make a living as a musician, depending on what level you want to do it on. You should probably think about moving to a place like New York or Los Angeles. So I always really liked New York. I liked a lot of the music that came out of New York. So actually, me and my friend Ludwig moved up to New York. Yeah, together, and shared a little apartment. I lived in a tent. He got the bedroom. We flipped, I think. And anyway, so finally moved up to New York to go to a great school called the New School that had just started a jazz studies program. It's part of the Parsons School of Design, and it's still great. And I went there for a couple of reasons. One, because the school was really great, I wanted to keep studying, and two, because I wanted to figure out a way to get to New York. And this was a great way to, obviously I was lucky I had a lot of support from my family with music all along, which was very helpful for me. And then, it got my foot in the door in New York. So shortly after I moved to New York, I was, going to school and started playing some different bands, and I met the guys who were in the Spin Doctors, which was the band I've been in for like 25 years. And the guitar player and the singer were going there, and the guitar player asked me to be in the band. So I started playing with them, and at some point I made a decision I was going to really, put my time and effort into this thing. Because when I moved up there, I wasn't really sure whether I wanted to be like a session guy, drummer for hire guy, or a guy in a band. And I've always been equally attracted to drummers that did both. Like I've always been just as much of a fan as John Bonham as I have of like Steve Gadd. And Tony Williams and Elvin Jones are great jazz drummers. So I've always had a real diversified understanding and passion for different kinds of music, which I think is important. Even if you want to do one thing, let's say you want to be a rock drummer, or you want to be a jazz drummer, or whatever the style you like. I think you're missing a lot if you don't, at least take a listen to all the other stuff, because usually the guys that come up with something fresh and new are the ones that are, have their minds really open and are, exploring all those options. And obviously in this day and age, it's even, with YouTube and everything, you got so much at your fingertips, which is great. And so anyway, eventually, the Spin Doctors, we used to work really hard in New York City. We played like 5 nights a week. And our goal was really to make a living playing original music. So we were one of the few bands in New York City at the time that was playing like 4 or 5 nights a week. Most of the other bands were just kind of wanting to get a record deal. They were rehearsing, making demos, and trying to shop it around. It was all about the record deal. And we kind of got the record deal from just working really hard and building up a big following. And eventually, 3 or 4 years later, after that hard work, we got a record deal. And we really started to work hard and toured and toured and toured. And, to make a long story short, eventually that first record we did very well and became a big hit. And the band has, had our ups and downs. We've broken up a few times. I've had a few different members, but here we are 25 years later, and it's all the original guys, and we've got a really nice, solid career with the group, and it's great. And in between all that, as that was going on and some of the downtime with the band, I was able to really, focus on being more of a sideman and session guy. And I'm lucky that I got a lot of experience working with a lot of different great artists, and that's been really valuable. So I feel lucky I've been able to make a career out of, being a guy in a band, and also being a guy that works with a lot of other great and talented artists. So here I am now, and this is a great opportunity for me. I like to always try to do things that challenge me. I think it's, something you can really think about, like when you're practicing. I think the tendency is to pick up whatever instrument you have and play something really well. And then you're like, man, I'm great. This is awesome. Okay, let's go have some fun. And anybody can do that, but the trick is, is to really try to do things that you're not so good at. So, whenever I get a chance to practice, I try to as much as I can. I'm very busy, playing a lot. But when I have some free time, I like to practice. And I always try to think about what are the things that I feel like I'm struggling with or not so good at, and work on those. And even like, I think like at this point for me, I think really for anybody, although you need to put a lot of hours in, really finding a way to have really focused practice sessions is really important. You should definitely spend some time, just playing, but learn how to divide your time between like working on whatever it is you're working on with your teacher and all the reading and rudiments and maybe figuring out what it is that you think you need work on, and then doing just some free playing. So I named that when I've been doing a few of these clinics lately, and then I figured, okay, what am I going to do? I can just come up here and talk or ask questions, which is basically what we're doing. But I wanted to put a title on it. So I thought about what are the 4 things that really I think make good music, and I came up with honesty, originality, sound, and technique. To me, are kind of 4 things that I feel are really important. Obviously, starting from the backwards, you got to have the technique. And how many drummers are there in here? All right, cool. We got any guitar players? Any bass players? Any singers? Cool. Anything else? Any other instruments?
6-string bass, man.
All right, cool. That's 2 extra strings. So anyway, so technique, I think for any instrument, it's you got to have a certain amount of technique to get your expression across. There's certainly some great musicians that they don't have a lot of technique, and I don't think it's the most important thing in being a great musician, but it's something that you need, and particularly the drums is a very technical instrument. So if you want to get to a certain level on the drums and be able to play with a lot of different people and play a lot of different styles and be comfortable, you got to have good technique. And then, originality, I think, is something, that is very important, because there's already, there's no reason, you want to have your influences, and I know I have a handful of guys that I love, and I'm constantly channeling when I play, and it's good to do that. It's good to think about different musicians that you like, but eventually you want to try to get your own sound and your own style by figuring out the things that you like or don't like about the different musicians, and same thing goes for your sound, And the thing, the point I want to make is that you don't necessarily have to have a garbage can lid or 20 drums or whatever it is to be original. Everybody's really got their own original voice. Even when you're just playing a simple rock beat, and everyone in the room here would play that, and it would sound, rhythmically it's the same, but every one of us has a different way of doing it, where we put our beat, the sound we get, so we're all original in our own way. It's just a matter of trying to kind of figure out what that voice is. And then the honesty part is really just, playing what you mean, and it might be a hard concept to understand when you're young. Somebody says, like, play honest, but it's really the most important thing, because if you're playing honest, then really you can play whatever you want and it's going to sound good. Like, take a guy like Charlie Watts, from the Rolling Stones. There's a guy that's just, he's a really simple, grooving drummer, but everything he plays is so honest, it doesn't really matter if it's like, if he messes up, or if it's sloppy, or a guy like Tony Williams is a great example of a guy that is extremely technical and plays some of the most advanced, polyrhythmic, complicated things, but to me it never sounds like he's showing off. It never sounds like he's just playing a bunch of licks. It's really, because he's playing everything honest, he's playing for the music. And that's the most important thing. So it doesn't matter whether you're playing the simplest thing or the most complicated thing, as long as you're playing it for the right reasons, and you're not just doing it to like show off. Because I think people can tell. It's like if your mom asks you, hey, did you do your homework? And you looked at her and you said, yeah. She probably knows if you didn't really do it. And same thing, I think, if a drummer just gets up there and starts playing all these fancy licks. Some people might like that, but I think it's kind of obvious, and certainly in most musical settings in the real world, you're not going to be able to get away with that. If you go on a gig and somebody's got a nice song, they want you to interpret that. If you just go in there and start playing with even some fancy lick you've been practicing in the practice room, they're going to look at you and be like, what's that? You know, that has nothing to do with the song. So, which leads me to another point, which is, you know, writing music. And I think that, you know, for drummers in particular, I think it's really can be very beneficial to play some other instruments. You know, have a knowledge of a little bit of guitar, piano, bass, because then you'll be able to understand, you know, when you're on the other side of the, you know, you'll be able to understand what these people are dealing with you, and you're dealing with them. And because that's really, that's how good music is made, is when everybody, you know, bends together and finds a common ground. Because we've all got, you know, you might find a bass player that's naturally kind of plays ahead of the beat, and maybe you play behind the beat or whatever it is. And sometimes you get with guys that just get in there and they're just like, this is where it is, you know, and it's going to be that way no matter what. But that's really not the way it should be. You know, you should keep your ears open and listen to what the other musicians you're playing with, listen to where their rhythm is, and everybody's got to kind of meet in the middle and figure out what's going to make. That's how you're going to get a really good groove in a band. And so I think for a drummer, if you have a little bit of an understanding of other instruments, and also if you can get into some writing, you know, writing music, writing your own songs, even if it's not something you necessarily want to pursue, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but, you know, I know for me, I've always been into writing music and collaborating on songs with people, and I know, like, you know, the first time I ever had my own song, played it, you just come at it in a different way, because you don't want to ruin your own song, you know? So you're not going to play some fancy stuff to try to show yourself. You're really thinking about the whole song. So what I've learned is, you know, whether or not it's your song or not, you should play every song that anybody brings in like it is your own song. So that's why I recommend at least trying to do some writing and bring it into a band and playing it, because I think it'll really help the instrument that you have, just understanding how to respect the music, you know. And that's a big lesson as you get older and start playing with people and playing in groups or working with different people. It's a really important thing. So I'd love to hear some questions from you guys. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, when it comes to jazz music, I play guitar and stuff. So when I'm soloing over a form of a tune,
right,
I'm thinking about chord changes and the melody and all these things. I'm wondering about a drummer, because I don't, you know, I know drums have serious harmonic differences and things from guitars and basses and pianos and things, but during a solo, for instance, what are you thinking about? Random stuff? What do you think about? Like,
that's a great question.
Well, I mean, like the melody. Are you focusing on the melody? And also, if you do that, do you practice that with a metronome? Also, how would Tony Williams answer the question after you get done? Seriously.
Well, I don't know how Tony would answer it. I can answer it. Basically, that's a good question. Basically, his question was, if you're playing like a jazz standard song, and you know, if you listen to jazz music, a lot of times you'll hear there's a melody, and then there'll be solos, and then they'll go back to the melody. And in most jazz music, when you go to the solo section, the instruments are playing the solos over the form of the song. So let's say the form of the song is a 12-bar blues. You have the melody, and then when you get to the solo section, you would play the solo over those same changes and think about the melody while you're doing it. So the same thing goes for a drummer. So in a jazz situation, if it comes to a drum solo, you're just not gonna go up there and start playing a bunch of open stuff and then give them a sign and come back in. I mean, you might if that's what you agree to do, but normally it's gonna be you're gonna put up the melody. So how about I give an example of that?
Sure.
I'm going to do let's see, how about, there's a song called Billy's Bounce, which is a blues form. And I'm just going to play the melody. I'm not going to sing it because I don't have a very good voice. But I'm going to play the melody on the drums. I'm going to play it 2 times through, and then I'll do a solo for 2 choruses, and I'll come back and I'll play the melody on the drums 1 time. So when you're listening to this rhythm, you'll hear that's going to be the melody of the song. you follow that? I mean, do you understand the concept of it, basically? And those are really good kind of things to work on, you know. I mean, it's, you know, and again, even if jazz is your thing, it's really good backbone. I was real lucky to get, you know, turned on to it at an early age. And it's something I love. I still play a lot of jazz gigs up in New York, and it's just it's a very good thing. Just like, you know, classical music, you know, all these different types of things to have under your belt are really just going to make you a richer, fuller player, you know. Yeah.
Aaron, you played a lot of years, you know, and like, have you ever dealt with a serious injury in drumming?
I wouldn't say serious, but I have dealt with, I had some pretty bad tendonitis about 5 years ago. Right here, like in my wrist and here, and I think it was just from, you know, years of repetitive motion, playing traditional grip and doing a lot of loud, hard backbeat stuff. I think it just finally took its toll. And, you know, so I as soon as it started to happen, I, you know, went to a doctor and I did like physical therapy for, you know, 2 or 3 days a week for, you know, when I was in town. And it helped a lot. And I kind of changed, it forced me to rethink my technique. And, you know, I found like sometimes, you know, I was holding the sticks a little too tight, and, you know, so I've really tried to loosen up my grip and become more conscious. And luckily I've had no problems at all. You know, it just took about a year to totally heal up, but it scared me. I mean, it's something that I think most musicians, you know, that play for a long time at some point get some kind of injury, you know, drummers, guitar players, whatever it is. I don't know too many guys who've been playing as long as I have that haven't dealt with something. So you just gotta, that's another reason why technique is important, you know, if nothing else, just for your physical well-being, you know, because you can injure yourself if you're doing things wrong.
Right. Because I've known guys who've had serious injuries and they've compensated in other ways, just, you know, learning what they didn't have, you know,
right,
to do their gigs.
Yeah, I mean, you got to do the gig, you know. I mean, I played through the whole thing. I mean, I told the doctor, I was like, look, I can't stop playing. And she was great because she was like, you should play through it. You want to build your muscles up, but you just have to be more conscious, you know, while you're doing it, and you don't blow them out. Because some guys you can blow them out, and they, you know, the next you don't want to, you want to avoid the surgery option if possible. I know a lot of guys that have had to do that, but I really think it's like usually so you're doing something wrong. Not always, but a lot of times it's just something you can kind of fix in the way you're sitting even, or the way you're holding your technique, you know, sticks or whatever it is, the way you're holding. I mean, a lot of bass players have problems because it's this thing, you know, can really mess you up. So you just got to be conscious of it. Yeah.
2 questions. What's your daily routine? Just what's something you do every day that's good to do every day, and what would be something that's good to work on your time every day? Is it just simply putting a metronome on, even just hitting with it,
Yeah.
or subdividing? And then secondly, have you ever had to practice on pads because of a sound, because you can't be loud? And how does your technique not transfer from having to deal with pads or something?
Right. Let me start with that question. Well, you know, when I first went to New York, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, I had a little, like, Leonard remembers. I got one of those practice pad kits, you know, and yeah, it was great, you know, but it's not the same. I mean, I think, you know, you can get a lot of technical practice, and it's very efficient. And just, I mean, to this day, I still do a lot of practicing on just a regular, like, you know, snare practice pad at home. Because recently, I actually started taking lessons again myself in the last year, which has been great. And I'm kind of going back to a lot of the stuff that I hadn't done in like 20 years, you know, just going back over the rudiments and reading and syncopation exercises and all that stuff. And so the practice pad, I mean, it's great. You know, it's not a drum set, it's a different feel, so you have to make sure you play the drums, but I think it's a great tool for practice. As far as working on your time, metronome, definitely. You know, I mean, I recommend everybody practice, you know, 75% of your practice with a metronome. Because if you don't, you know, especially when you're younger and you're not 100% certain about your time, you know, you're just not going to know you're messing up a lot of times unless you have that click in your ear. You know, and even when you get older, you know, even the best drummers sometimes might drag or rush or do things they're not aware of. And so I think practicing with a metronome is really important. And then also when you start getting into recording situations, you know, in a lot of cases you're going to be playing with a click track, so you just got to be 100% comfortable. If you go into a recording situation, there's not any kind of, you know, nobody's going to put up with if the drummer can't play with a click like it's not there, then you're out the door. So it's different maybe when you're in a band and everybody's working together, but if you're just in some session, you gotta sound great like you do without a click, with a click. So I think practicing with a click is great. And as far as what to do, I mean, just anything you work on, like any of your like technical exercises, reading, rudiments. I know I spent a lot of time just playing like the simple groove, different tempos, different types of grooves with the click, doing it for like 15, 20 minutes, and you're just kind of in a trance. And eventually you'll find that you don't even hear the thing anymore. And that's kind of where you want to get to. Was that everything?
That's it,
Yeah.
Like after everything you were like exposed to, what do you think influenced you the most, like style-wise?
Style-wise? I mean, I've had so many different influences. I mean, I know, it's a good question. And, honestly, it's constantly changing. I try to really, I try to keep my ears open a lot. I mean, when I was younger, it was like, John Bonham, I loved, obviously I went through a Neil Peart phase, when I was really young. And then I started to get into guys like Steve Gadd. And then I started to discover jazz and get into guys like Tony Williams and Elvin Jones. And I really got into Bernard Purdie, and when I first moved to New York, I studied with Bernard Purdie, who was a real big influence right when I moved there, and still is. I think I've been real attracted to a lot of like really great groove drummers, guys that have like a really deep, solid pocket, which is why I like guys like Purdie and Gadd and Steve Jordan. But then there's some great young drummers that I'm really into. There's a good friend of mine in New York named Mark Giuliani. He's an amazing drummer. And he's been like a big influence on me this year. So I mean, I'm like 45, so I'm in a great place because I got guys older than me that are a big influence, and now these amazing young drummers that I'm checking out that are starting to influence me. So I think the main thing is just to, you find the guys who they like and kind of shape your sound, but you got to keep listening to who's out there, and if you hear something you like, you grab it. Yeah.
What was your goal as a 9-year-old when you started, and what is your goal as a drummer now?
Well, my goal when I was a 9-year-old was just to, learn how to play a little bit. But shortly after that, I knew I wanted to do this professionally. I remember actually being like 12 and going to junior high school and walking off the bus, and one of my friends said to me, he was like, "Hey man, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And I said, "I'm going to be a professional musician." And I remember I really meant it. I remember actually thinking when I said that, like I wasn't just kind of saying, "Yeah, I'm going to be a musician." I really meant it, And it was always just about being a musician. I never wanted to be like a rock star. It was just like I wanted to be like a really good musician that made a living doing it. Yeah. And now really it's the same goal. I think it's one of the reasons I started taking lessons again, because I've been playing professionally for 20 years, and it's kind of like here I am. I just turned 45, and I want to keep getting better, and I want to kind of figure out, okay, where am I going to be in 20 years? So now it's like I kind of have my goal for the last 20 years, which was to obviously do the Spin Doctors and play, get as much experience as a sideman and session guides and producing it. And that's still the same, but I think I want to, I just want to keep growing and keep improving. I don't want to, and drums is a hard instrument, I think, to continue to really be strong as you get older, because it is such a technical instrument. You've got to continue to work really hard at it. Because as you see, there's some great drummers that they just get better and better. Like Elvin Jones, for instance, I'd go see him all the time, and he sounded amazing up until the day he died. He didn't lose anything. Jim Keltner I think sounds better now than he ever has. Bernard Purdie still sounds incredible. Steve Gadd. There's a lot of great drummers that, that your style changes. You might not play maybe as hard or as fiery as you did when you're younger. Some do, some don't. But it's there's a depth that hopefully continues. But you also see in some cases where drummers just kind of lose their facilities, and you can still hear they have their thing, but it may not be like on the same level. Because you got to play all the time. Drumming is an instrument that you really kind of got to just, if you're playing a lot, you'll keep it together. If you don't, you can feel things kind of falling away. So that's why I went and took lessons. I just told my new teacher, I said, "Hey man, I really just want, I just need like a little kick, because I've been out here doing this professionally, and I think when you're up on the gig, if you're in a recording studio, you're up on stage with somebody, you know, you just want it to sound good. See, a lot of times you're not necessarily thinking about how you're going to hold your sticks or how you're going to do this. You're going to do anything it takes to make it sound good. And I felt like I developed a few bad habits. I was noticing I was just doing some things that I wanted to kind of retweak. So he's been great, you know, helping me do that. Kenny?
So who's the new teacher and how did you decide on him?
His name is Michael Carvin. He's a real, I mean, he's a great jazz drummer. We played with a lot of people like Freddie Hubbard and all kinds of people in the 60s and 70s. And he also did a lot of Motown records in LA before he moved to New York and did more jazz. But in the last 20 years, he's basically just been like he's a very, you know, well-known teacher. And so when I decided to study again, I started kind of asking a bunch of people. I was like, hey man, you know, who do you think would be a good teacher for somebody like me? And he teaches a lot of guys like myself, like more experienced drummers. And his name kept coming up, you know, and so I finally called him up and went to him, and I've been seeing him, like, I go about once a month, you know, I've been doing it for like the last year. Yeah.
How often these days you think when you play the exercises, woodshedding in your playing, do you ever think about that much these days?
I understand. Say it again?
Okay, like woodshedding and drum exercises, how often do you think about that in your playing?
Like when I'm playing, how often I think about the exercise? I try not to at all when I'm playing.
Yeah.
I mean, I might have some concepts that I think about when I'm playing, you know, like different ideas or like, but as far as actual exercises, I try to separate that. That's more like just to work on my technique or something, or get comfortable. I try to get that out of my head when I'm playing just to, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you'll find like if you do certain things, they're gonna, you know, like anybody here that's taken lessons from Henry Oxtel, which I know you have, and Kenny and Gerald have, he does like a bunch of, you know, all those different ways out of syncopation to the accents, and you know, so you know, you do a lot of that. Some of that stuff's gonna creep into your playing, or any kind of stuff you're doing. But I think it's better to not play what you practice when you're playing music.
Sure.
But I do have concepts that I think about. Like I'll give you an example of a musical concept. I actually stole this from Mark Giuliani. Basically, just like when you're soloing, for instance, to you know, because the thing you want to try not to do when you're soloing is just go, you want to have some kind of maybe some, you know, think of rhythms or themes or dynamics, and it's nice sometimes to have a little something to come back to, whether it's a rhythm or a pattern. So there's an idea of like playing, just taking a really simple pattern and playing it the exact same way, but changing the tempo. So for instance, like, let's say this is the pattern. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then changing the rate of it. So if we're doing that, let's say we had a tempo. So I'm going to play in this tempo, but I'm not going to do anything with those four rhythms on these 4 drummers. I'm just going to mix them up in a way and try to make something of it. And this is kind of an idea that I might use like inside of a solo or something. Actually, why don't you guys clap, if you don't mind? Just clap 4. Don't rush, don't rush. So, you know, that's like little things like that. Anything you can come up with like that, you know, can be helpful when you're just up there all alone doing a solo and trying to make it musical. You know, I find it's good to have a little something to grab a hold of in your mind, so you're not, because you know the thing you don't want to have happen is have your hands start doing the work for you, which happens a lot. You know, because you're practicing this stuff. You see this with guitar players a lot. It's like, you know, they're practicing their runs. You know how some of those guitar players will do something and they'll just rush, they'll go there, and it's like the hands just kind of run away from them. Same thing with drummers, you know. It's like so I think it's good to to try to think more with your heart and your mind rather than let your hands. We're all guilty of doing it sometimes, but that's the challenge. So any little thing you can grab a hold of, little motifs or ideas while you're soloing, I find to be really helpful. Yeah.
Are you the drummer on Twist and Shout?
I am actually. How did you know that?
I didn't believe it.
Actually, I think it's Bernard Purdy. No, I think it's Ringo Starr actually. Yeah.
So as a generally jazz drummer, do you ever look at drummers from different genres, like Nick Menza or Gar Samuelson?
Well, I'm not even sure who those guys are.
Oh, okay.
Who are those guys?
Drummers from Megadeth.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Or just drummers from other genres.
Yeah, I totally do. I mean, I don't know a lot of the names of those guys, but I totally know the music and check it out. I mean, again, that's the beauty of YouTube. I mean, some of those guys are unbelievable. You know, the double bass drum stuff and the speed, and I mean, it's technically, incredible stuff and super cool, And yeah, I mean, again, I think it's really important I try to check out as much stuff as I can, even if it's not. I mean, I couldn't really play that, and I can't play double bass that fast, but it's amazing stuff, But I just can't stress enough how important it is to cover as much ground as you can. I mean, old jazz, old blues, old R&B, new R&B, all the different eras of rock, heavy metal, everything. On and on and on. And obviously now, we're in an age now where the drum machine's been around for a long time, and all that hip hop and drum and bass has totally made its way into, the real drumming now, and it's the more time goes by, the more stuff there is to fuse into what we do. But with that said, it's important to respect the styles you're playing with. It's great to mix everything up too, and I love super weird creative music, and I kind of believe that all the rules should be broken, but I think you should understand them first and know, if you're going on a blues gig or something, you're not going to bring your double bass drum pedal, because they're going to look at you like, and understand, just to get a good knowledge of as many different styles as you can. And the best way to do that is just by listening to it, and that's the best education, outside of playing it, is really listening, checking it out.
Yeah, I'm a guitar player, not a drummer, but most of what you're speaking is universal and
Right.
fascinating. I'm enjoying this very much. I was wondering more about the collaboration process. When you're in a band with 4 people, 5 people, you're 4 painters painting the same picture, essentially. I was liking what you were talking about, the collaboration piece. Could you expand on that a little bit more with the Spin Doctors? How do you approach writing music with a group?
Yeah, well, I think ultimately the collaboration process is the same, but I think in a lot of cases being in a band is different. It's different than collaborating in a band than it is like if you go and work for another artist, because that's why like the Who sounds like the Who, because nobody's looking back at Keith Moon saying, why are you doing that, or and that's the beauty of the bands is like you got 4 or 5 or whatever really strong personalities, and part of being in a band is everybody bringing those personalities out and shining, and that's what makes a great band. It's when everybody really, if you think about the best bands, everybody in the band has a strong personality. Inside of like a sideman situation, a lot of times it's different because it's more about kind of backing up the artist, and in some cases they might be open to whatever, but so it's a little different. But as far as with the Spin Doctors, for instance, the collaboration process, it really just depends. Usually it starts with somebody writing a song, it may be, with us, there's songs we've all written together, there's songs that 1 or 2 of us have written, or 3 of us, all kinds of different permutations. But ultimately, it's, and this applies to anything, that you bring the song in and everybody listens to it, and you try to, I think the thing that applies universally is just, respecting the song, and I always like to hear, if I didn't have anything to do with writing the song, I always want to hear the song like in its barest form. So like if I go into a session, usually I like it the most if like the artist, whether it's just the artist at a piano or a guitar or whatever it is, I like to hear it like that first, just raw. And then you can get an idea of what you want to play on it. And obviously, every musician is going to have a different idea of what might be the right thing to play. And hopefully they call you because they're going to trust, they want you to do your thing. In some situations they might be like, well, I have a specific idea, I'd like you to try this, or, oh, that sounds great, or I don't like that, try this. So a lot of it's just, you know, really again trying to put your creative hat on, come up with something quickly that's really cool and musical and suits the song. But at the same time, you got to be ready to shift gears in a second and not, you know, have your ego hurt. You know, just because you came up with what you think's right doesn't mean that's, you know, what they want or whatever. So, and that same thing in a band. It's a little harder to deal with that in a band. Like, it's a little harder to tell somebody in the band, like, oh man, I'm not really digging what you're doing. Then, you know, everybody starts getting mad at each other. So, but you know, part of it is being able to set your ego aside and look at the big picture. You know.
As a follow-up to that question there, you know, if there's a tune that you didn't write in your group, and there's some parts that you feel are just strange and you're not really into that much, do you try to change them, or do you try to suggest
with one of the other musicians?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you know, I mean, with the Spin Doctors, we've been together long enough to where it's gotten to a point where, for the most part, it's fine. You know. But yeah, I mean, everybody might have an idea like, oh, that's not really. Why don't you try this, or you know.
Yeah. Super. That is super. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. What is your just basic practice schedule consist of?
Well, it really depends. I mean, I'm pretty busy usually. Yeah. You know, I'm busy playing a lot. So, but again, when I have the time, I love to. You know, I try to practice as much as I can. So unfortunately, I don't have a steady schedule. I mean, I mean, when I was your age, I had a very, you know, diligent type of practice schedule. Now it's a little different, but I try to, again, when I do get that hour or 2 hours to go down and practice, I'll usually I put on the metronome and I pull out some books and work on, like, you know, some technical stuff that maybe giving me trouble, and even lately I've been going back to rudiments, or going back to the basics, because there's things that I feel like I used to do better when I was 14, you know, just because I was doing them every day, and now I'm a much better musician. But you know, again, you have to just constantly keep certain aspects of your technique together. So that's usually, when I practice now, I usually work on like technique, and then maybe like if I'm working on some new types of beats or new types of rhythms, I'll do that as well. Kind of come up with some new stuff. Jerry?
So you gave some examples about playing jazz solos to the guys, but a lot of these guys are not, you know, as familiar with a jazz standard and stuff like that. So applying the same concepts to a rock solo.
Right.
And of course you talked about using a motif and changing it around and using it in different ways, but go a little bit deeper into playing solos in a rock context.
Right.
That, you know, what's the thought process behind playing solos
Right.
off of a groove in rock?
Well, that's usually in a rock context is different, because it usually tends to be, as with jazz, it usually tends to be that you're playing over a form of song. Usually in a rock context, it's usually a little more open. It's usually like, okay, the drum solo. And that could be like the big rock drum solo, you know, or it could be like, I like to, like with the Spin Doctors, I like to do, sometimes I'll do just a big open solo, but I like to play around a motif. Like at the concert last night, there's a song where we have a little drum solo, and usually I like it with the bass player and the guitar player doing a riff, you know, dun 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 or something like that, you know, dun 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 dun, and I can play around that. And again, kind of like I was talking about before, because it just gives you something to feed off of. To me, it just makes it a little more musical. And again, in a rock context, it's, you know, rock is, I mean, I think when I'm playing a solo in a rock contest in front of a big crowd, you know, you have to remember you are entertaining the crowd. You don't want to lose them with a bunch of like esoteric kind of playing. So I mean, I tend to maybe play. I like to try to start big. You know, I think the tendency of the drum solos is just to bam, just start playing your fastest stuff, which is cool. But I think it's nice to, you know, sometimes you just leave a big space, or you start and you build up to a point where build up to that climax where you're really playing some heavy, fast stuff. It's going to be a lot more effective, and the crowd, you'll get a much better crowd reaction than if you just start, if you give them everything you got from the beginning, I think you can just kind of tire them out. So, I mean, that would be my best advice in a rock context is big, fat, you know, again, find a motif, build up to a climax, sometimes big spaces, you know, so the crowd will, you know, because it's rock, you know, and it's just as musical as jazz, and it's just a different. I mean, I think all the different types of music, I find them all equally valid and equally musical, and I respect them all equally. But it's important to understand this, again, getting back to understanding the styles. And when you're in jazz, most people that listen to jazz, a lot of them are musicians, and a lot of people, or there are real diehard jazz lovers that just like the sound of it, but it's a much more intellectual musical form. And the trick is to make that complicated thing sound really musical. So,
can you demonstrate a rock solo?
Sure. All right, so I'm gonna build it off this. Pretend like that the band's going. Yeah.
More.
That was a short version, but you hear the idea, starting off kind of simple and building, hard, heavy, trying to do something that's going to maybe get the crowd kind of excited, but still be a musical, I mean, I have to play, I'm not a guy that can just get up there and just go, but you can be entertaining and still be musical. I mean, John Bonham was a perfect example of that. He's a guy that, there's not a better rock drummer ever, and he was very impressive technically, super heavy, but you never got the feeling he was just up there showing off either. It was, real. But,
you made mention of not letting your fingers do too much talking, and going back to motifs during playing and more intellectual side.
right.
And I'm wondering, is there a style? I mean, I know jazz, for instance, there's enough open space potentially to get to a combination of both. So I'm thinking about stylistically. Is there a point when you play in the style that you play where you're not doing really either, and you're just in the moment? And how do you stress that to young kids who build up a lot of chops and they really don't know what to do with them necessarily, or use them for show? How to find a lane, said something like speaking through your head and your heart.
Right.
What's the combination? How would you address that?
I mean, that's kind of why I think I was kind of talking about writing music. I think is really helpful, because when you're I have my own group where I play my own original instrumental music. So, I know when I'm doing that, I'm playing my own music, it's my own melodies, my own stuff. So you're really, again, you really are trying to be. It's a tough question to answer, but I mean, I think it's just you just got to kind of just remember how important it is to do that. I don't even really know if I can pinpoint a style. I'm not sure what the question is.
I think that the question is, how do you play without making your hands do the talking? How do you not let your technique get in the way of your music? How do you become musical when you play?
I think it's just you have to keep reminding yourself. It's not something that you can just do overnight, because everybody is guilty. Any drummer out there, any musician out there, at some point or another when they were young, was guilty of doing that. So I think it's really just something you have to just remember, try to think about when you're playing, try to stop thinking so much when you're playing, and just really focus on the music. Try to get your head really focus on the other instruments, focus on the song. Try to stop focusing so much on the drums, because you're an instrument. We're drummers, but we're musicians, and I think we remember that you're part of the whole group. If you got let's say there's a center, a bass player, guitar player, piano player, drummer. You're 5 people, but you're one instrument. You got to think of yourself as part of just the sum of the parts, and get out of the head of I'm the drummer. That's the best advice I can give for that. Yeah.
Yeah, on the same kind of a concept there. I've seen that you've done shows with absolute monsters like Mark Giuliani, John, what is it, Giuliana?
Right.
Just a complete monster, just an amazing musicians, just like yourself. Now, in a situation like that, when you're on the same bill in the same show, is it kind of ever a contest of trying to blow more minds than the other person, or any, or you know, I mean,
Yeah, no, and
I don't mean that funny. I don't mean that funny. I mean like just, you know, because there's two monsters in the same room. It's like,
Right.
is it?
Yeah, that's a good question, but no, the answer is no. I mean, not for me and not for him. You know, I mean, I think that happens a lot of times. But, but I mean, you know, the answer is that should never be your goal is to blow away the other guy.
No,
and no, I understand.
I don't mean the other guy. I just mean like to try to like, you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you know, hopefully you get to a point where you just realize you are who you are. And that's kind of what I was talking about originality. Honestly, originality, sound. You know, it's like, you know, I mean, ultimately you're going to find your own voice, and you just got to become comfortable with who you are, and not try to be somebody else, and feel good about what you do. You know.
Do you ever do a lot of transcription, or actually getting into listening to specific solos maybe and getting it note for note, or is that not something that you do?
I have, when I was younger, I used to do that a lot. I haven't.
How would you do that? Because it seems on a harmonic instrument, it's easier to hear. Sometimes with drums, it's like, well, it sounds stalled together. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, if you can like look at Modern Drummer, there's always like, or look online, there's tons of transcriptions, and there's, you know, drum notation that you can use, and it's just, you know, and I used to do a lot of that when I was like in high school and college. It's a helpful thing to do.
That's probably a good way to get out of being stuck with technique. You would think.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's a definitely good exercise to analyze a drummer's style. Like if there's a drummer you really like, it's a great way to understand what he's doing a little more. But you know, I think as far as getting out of when you're up playing, it's just more a matter of like just getting your head out of the practice room and just playing the music. That's all it is. Just focusing on the music. I think that's the best way to do it. Cool. I'm gonna do about 4 or 5 more questions and play a little more and then wrap it up.
Aaron, I found out when listening to jazz, when I'm trying to learn new jazz standard songs and melodies and things like that, if I don't have somebody sitting or analyzing the song with me, sometimes I think I'll be hearing the bridge instead of the turnaround, so I have a musician there to analyze it. I found that helpful. Like one time I was singing a melody to Birdland Weather Report, and Moondog corrected me on a football on one of the notes. Yeah. So I like that, you know, interaction in my jazz studies, getting with somebody. As far as songs go, melodies, song form.
Yeah. Yeah. Again,
as
like,
opposed to going to it alone.
well, yeah. I mean, just listen to music, and when you listen to it, just trying to make sure you hear where the melody starts and finishes, and being aware of it on the solo section. You know, and then the best thing to do is get with some guys and play some stuff, and that's how you really will start to understand it. You know.
What is your setup at home?
My setup at home is pretty. These aren't my drums; these are Gerald's drums, but this is very close to what I use. I usually use a 22-inch kick drum. I mean, I use all kinds of stuff, but my basic setup is a 22-inch kick, 12 tom, 16 floor, different snare drums, and usually I use 2 or 3 cymbals. Usually use like a ride and 2 crashes and hi-hats, different sizes, depending on what I'm doing. But that's my basic setup, like a 4-piece. Yeah.
You do a lot of playing with like all sorts of different styles and all sorts of different musicians. What about the musicians you play with, like, do you like about them? As opposed to like maybe you'll play with people and you don't like the vibe they're giving out or something. Like, what makes you like the musicians you play with?
Right. That's a great question. Usually it's the music that they're presenting. If I really like the type of music they're doing, if they're really good at it, and if they're nice. I mean, first it's like if the music's really good quality, and because then it's going to be the most fun. If the artist you work with is really good, or the musicians they have are really good, that's great. And then it's always a pleasure when the people are fun to work with and everybody gets along great and everybody's nice, and that usually makes the music better. When people get along and have a good time together, you go out for dinner together, and everybody's friends, and you build up some camaraderie. Usually, not always, but 9 times out of 10, when you start making music together, it's better because everybody's friendly, So, which is, it's a good question, and also, besides being like a really good musician, when you go into these situations, it's important to